Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 8 waiver wire ads for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, we're going to be going in depth into some running backs, wide receivers, as well as tight ends that I believe you guys should be picking up off of the waiver wire right now. But before we can get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I would also like to ask, if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me on there, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the video description. So without further ado, let's get on into my week number 8 waiver wire ads, beginning at the running back position, headlined by Elijah Mitchell, running back of the San Francisco 49ers, going up against the Chicago Bears in Chicago. Now, surprisingly, Elijah Mitchell is owned on NFL.com in less than 60% of leagues, which means there are more than 40% of leagues where Elijah Mitchell is available to pick up. And this was a little surprising to me, and then I realized that Elijah Mitchell was on bye not last week because he played up against the Colts, but the week before that, and his season as a whole hasn't been a necessarily smooth ride. It's been a rocky road because a lot of people spent up. They blew their fab load on Elijah Mitchell, and it didn't end up paying off that great because it was kind of a rocky road, like I was saying, where some weeks it's Elijah Mitchell. Then the next week, you never really know who it's going to be for the San Francisco 49ers. But based upon what we saw up against the Colts, where he had a really good game, even though the San Francisco 49ers got soaked in that game, and it's not because of the rain, it was because the Indianapolis Colts were soaking them with points. They were absolutely dousing the San Francisco 49ers, and the 49ers running back Elijah Mitchell still had a very solid game up against the Colts. He had 18 rushes for 107 yards and 1 touchdown. Interesting enough, Elijah Mitchell and Jonathan Taylor had the exact same stat line on the ground rushing the ball. They both had 18 attempts for 107 yards and a touchdown. I don't know if that has ever happened in the NFL where both running backs on each team end up having the same amount of rushing yards on the same amount of attempts as well as the same amount of touchdowns. That was very interesting to me. But what is even more interesting is the fact that Elijah Mitchell is still available in some leagues. So please go ahead and pick this man up, because if he's going to be able to put up these numbers up against the Colts where they are getting smacked down WWE style, I believe that Elijah Mitchell will continue to build on that success as the season goes on. I understand Jeff Wilson's going to return. I understand they still have JaMychal Hasty. They still have Trey Sermon. They still have Kyle Juszczyk, the fullback. They still have Trey Lance, who might just, when he returns, play running back for the team. But at the end of the day, I think Elijah Mitchell is a very serviceable running back, and if he is available on the waiver right now, he should be your number 1 waiver wire ad. Next up, the second running back here is Kenny Gainwell, running back of the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Detroit Lions this week in Detroit. It is reported that Miles Sanders is going to miss 2 to 3 weeks with that injury that he sustained in their matchup up against the Raiders last week, which opens the door for Kenneth Gainwell as well as Boston Scott to be seeing touches in this offense. It appears that Nick Sirianni actually wants to run the ball for once, and it just so happens that once they finally commit to the run, once everyone is super excited, holy shit, Miles Sanders is going to be getting the ball. This is amazing. Thank you, Nick Sirianni. It only took you 7 weeks to crack the code that, hey, maybe we need to run the football, and then the mere minute that it ends up being like, oh wow, look, it's finally Miles Sanders season, we're finally gonna see it, he gets hurt. And Kenneth Gainwell, to me, is the next man up. Now, this is not a system in Philadelphia where they're just gonna go with one main back. You think about the Minnesota Vikings. Dalvin Cook gets hurt, bada bing, bada boom, and then out of nowhere, Alexander Mattison has top 12 value. Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, and then boom. You see last year, Mike Davis gets inserted. He's the main back. This year, you see Hubbard, or Hubbard, as if that's how you say his fucking name, Chuba Hubbard, installed in as the main running back, and that works. That's not how things are going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles because they use a running back by committee. Now, I do believe that Kenneth Gainwell will be the biggest benefactor of that because I believe he will be the lead back in the running back by committee system. Last week, up against the Las Vegas Raiders, Kenny Gainwell had 5 rushes for 20 yards, as well as 4 receptions on 8 targets for 41 yards as well as a touchdown in that game. Now, we are going to be talking about Boston Scott a little bit later because he still does have inherent value with Miles Sanders gone. Now, again, the injury right now is reported to be 2 to 3 weeks, so that's nothing super severe. These are a couple of players that you can have for the next couple of games, but my thought process is that if Miles Sanders does return relatively soon and the team continues to want to actually fucking run the football, which makes a lot of sense, you kind of have to run the football to get your team set up for success, especially with a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, then maybe if they continue to run the ball more, even when Miles Sanders is back, then Kenneth Gainwell will still have value because he will still be used decently in this system. So I think Kenneth Gainwell is a guy that I really like this week at the running back position. I think he does have value long after Miles Sanders ends up returning. Next up, we got Brandon Bolden, running back of the New England Patriots this week, going up against the LA Chargers in LA. It appears that Ramondre Stevenson is just going to keep getting healthy scratched. And if that does continue, then Brandon Bolden is going to be a startable running back in PPR and half PPR formats. Why is that? Because the guy's going to get maybe 2-3 rushes a game, right? Last week, up against the Jumbo Jets, he had 2 rushes, which he turned into a goose egg of 0 fucking yards. He had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 79 yards and a tug. So all of his value is derived from the receiving game. So while he plays the running back position, while you're going to slot him in as a running back, all of his value comes from catching passes. So if you are in a standard league and say he gets 6 receptions on 7 targets for 79 yards, that's not amazing, right? But he does score the touchdown, so it would have been fine in a standard league. But you guys get what I'm saying. So much of his value comes from the targets, from the receptions, that he is a much better running back in half PPR as well as in full PPR leagues. Now, I don't understand why Bill Belichick is healthy scratching Ramondre Stevenson, because at least in my mind, Ramondre Stevenson is the second best back on this team behind Damian Harris. But they're not going to do it that way because Bill Belichick just has this hatred for rookie running backs. So it is what it is. Ramondre Stevenson, probably useless in fantasy football, but Brandon Bolden, very useful even when Damian Harris is healthy. Next up, we got Boston Scott, running back of the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Detroit Lions. Like I said, I do really believe that Kenneth Gainwell is the main back in Philadelphia in this running back by committee system. But in week number 7, up against the Las Vegas Raiders, Boston Scott saw 7 rushes for 24 yards and a touchdown. He also had 1 reception on 2 targets for 5 yards. So it's pretty clear what the roles are in this offense. Boston Scott is going to probably be the leader in the clubhouse in carries, but Kenneth Gainwell will be the leader in receptions. So most of the time, the guy that's getting the receptions just has more valuable fantasy football worth, right? Because he's getting those receptions, getting those targets. So I think Boston Scott is still valuable, but once Miles Sanders does end up returning, even if they are still running at this rate that we saw last week, I just don't think Boston Scott has that value where I feel as though Kenneth Gainwell does. Final running back on today's list is Samaje Perine, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against the Jumbo Jets in New York. This is a wet dream matchup for a running back. Now, Joe Mixon is still clearly the lead running back in Cincinnati. It's not like Samaje Perine is just going to surpass him and be the workhorse running back in Cincy. But fitting the theme of October, it's spooky season, it's scary, this fucking Cincinnati Bengals offense is frightening to other defenses because, get it, frightening, Halloween, very funny. The Bengals are really good. They're really good. I'm surprised. Sure, you're surprised as well. But even with Joe Mixon getting the ball so much, Samaje Perine is still valuable. In Week 5 up against the Green Bay Packers, he had 11 rushes for 59 yards as well as 4 receptions on 5 targets for 24 yards and a touchdown. Last week up against the Baltimore Ravens, he had 11 rushes for 52 yards and a touchdown as well as 1 reception on 1 target for 23 yards. Now, I don't think every single game Samaje Perine is a guy that you want to throw into your lineup, but the value up against the Jets seems as though even with Joe Mixon 100% healthy, that you want to be starting Samaje Perine this week up against the Jumbo Jets. But before we can move on to the wide receiver position, I would like to ask if you have ended up enjoying thus far to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's free. Doesn't cost you anything. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button down below as well. It would help me out a ton. So back on into it. We are now at the wide receiver position, headlined by Rashad Bateman, wide receiver of the Baltimore Ravens. He is on a bye this week. So if you need a bye week fill-in, now this week, it's not like last week. Last week, there were 6 teams on bye. This week, it's the Ravens and the Raiders on bye. So, not a bye-pocalypse like a lot of people were talking about last week. Not as bad, but if you do need a bye week fill-in, say you're relying on maybe Hunter Renfrow, you're relying on Henry Ruggs, or you have Marquise Brown, something like that, then obviously you're not going to fill that role with a player who is on bye. So make sure if you need a bye week fill-in, which doesn't seem as needed this week, right? Because in week number 8, there are not that many teams on bye, and it is very crazy that we're already in week number 8. It feels like the season just fucking started. It's already almost November. It's already almost Thanksgiving in America. I believe in Canada, it was already Thanksgiving, but it's just crazy how those things work, how time works. Very crazy, but back on into it. Rashad Bateman. Bateman, to me, is the clear number 2 wide receiver in Baltimore. In week number 7, up against the Cincinnati Bengals, he had 3 receptions on 6 targets for 80 yards. So it seems like he's going to have tons of value in an offense that, they're pretty good. One of the better offenses in the NFL. But Nick, didn't you see up against the Bengals? That offense was limp dick. That offense sucked. Sure, they had one bad game. It is what it is, right? It is what it is. I still believe Rashad Bateman has a lot of value, so he would be my number 1 wide receiver add. Next up, we have a wide receiver that this is a plug-and-play wide receiver, and that is Allen Lazard, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, going up against the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. Devontae Adams is placed on the COVID IR. And while that may not be a big deal if this game was on Sunday, this game is in 2 days on Thursday. So it is entirely possible, my projection would be that he misses the game. So if he misses the game, then there is just this huge circle, this wide gap of targets that are now missing in the offense that have to go somewhere. Now, I'm not here to tell you that 100% of those targets are going to go to Allen Lazard. I'm not even sure that Allen Lazard is the most talented wide receiver in this offense. The ball could be going to Randall Cobb. It could be going to anyone in this offense, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. But my best guess, based upon what we saw last week up against the Washington football team, is that Allen Lazard is the next man up. Last week up against the football team, he had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 60 yards, as well as a touchdown. Again, it's very dicey with these other wide receivers in this Green Bay system, but my best guess is that Mr. Allen Lazard ends up stepping up and filling that role. Next up, we move to the number 3 wide receiver, Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Carolina Panthers this week. Now, at the beginning of the season, the first 2 games before Gage got hurt, this guy was a fucking dumpster fire. This guy was an embarrassment to your roster, and I basically was talking him up all offseason. I was thinking, you know what? Julio Jones out, Russell Gage in. Obviously, not necessarily, right? Because Russell Gage isn't going to turn into fucking Julio Jones. But in last season, years prior, when Julio Jones was down, Russell Gage stepped up and played quite well. So I'm thinking, you know what? The history tells us that, hey, Russell Gage will probably be just fine. Like, nothing amazing, but just a fine pick in like the 10th, 11th round of drafts. And then this dude's a swing and a miss. But despite being a disaster early on, once this man returns, week 7 up against the Dolphins, I'm like, why would you ever want to start this guy? And then he has 4 receptions on 6 targets for 67 yards and a touchdown. So it's very evident that Russell Gage is going to be involved in this offense. And this offense, with Matt Ryan, Matty Ice Ice Baby, is a pass-heavy offense in Atlanta. So go ahead and pick up Russell Gage right now. I think he does have some value. Obviously, there will be down games where Kyle Pitts or Calvin Ridley just take over. They pound that defense in. But at the end of the day, I still do like Russell Gage a decent amount up against the Panthers. Next up, we got Darius Slayton, wide receiver of the New York Football Giants, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City. With all the injuries to the Giants wide receiver core, it just seems like you got to start Darius Slayton because it seems like Galladay's not going to play. Seems like maybe Sterling Shepard doesn't play. Seems like Kadarius Toney isn't going to play. So who's the next man up? It's Darius Slayton, week 7 up against the Carolina Panthers. 5 receptions on 9 targets for 63 yards. Now, if you're an intellectual like myself, you might be thinking, hey, the best wide receiver on Sunday up against the Panthers looked like Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones reached back like 1-3. You can't even see my hand because I have it cropped, but dude fucking reached back like Odell Beckham Jr. and snagged that thing. And now that's a joke, obviously. Darius Slayton's a better wide receiver than Daniel Jones. But what I'm saying is that with all of these injuries, there's so many injuries at the wide receiver position that Darius Slayton just has to be elevated up the wide receiver rankings, as well as making him a very plausible player for you to pick up off the waiver wire and play this week. Final wide receiver is Michael Gallup, wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, going up against the Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota. It's cold like Minnesota. All right, Michael Gallup, Haven't seen him since week 1, where he played up against the Buccaneers, 4 receptions on 7 targets for 36 yards. He's returning off of the IR, designated to play in this game up against the Vikings. Now, last week, I talked up Michael Gallup as, hey, you add him 1 week in advance. You add him last week so that people don't pick him up, right? Now you're going to have to pay potentially a higher price for Michael Gallup than you would have had to pay last week. Michael Gallup, but Nick, he's the wide receiver 3. I understand. I understand that CeeDee Lamb, that Amari Cooper are ahead of him in the totem pole, the rankings of the offense. But at the end of the day, I still believe Michael Gallup has value because of how good this Dallas Cowboys offense is, as well as based upon how good of a wide receiver Michael Gallup is. If he was on other teams, he'd be maybe the number 1 wide receiver or the number 2 wide receiver, depending on what team you insert him onto. Final position to discuss here is the tight end position, headlined by Ricky Seals-Jones, tight end of the Washington football team, going up against the Denver Broncos in Mile High this week. 2 solid weeks of production in a row for Ricky Seals-Jones. So without Logan Thomas, it's pretty clear that the role is very strong for Ricky Seals-Jones inside of this offense. I talked up Ricky Seals-Jones last week. I'm going to talk him up again this week. Like I said, he's had 2 solid weeks in a row. In week number 6 up against the Chiefs, he had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 58 yards, as well as a touchdown in that game. In week number 7 up against the Green Bay Packers, he had 6 receptions on 7 targets for 51 yards. So it is very clear, like I've been saying, that he's one of the premier options on this team besides Terry McLaurin, and there's a pretty solid chance that he moseys his way on into the end zone. Now, the Washington football team offense has looked like a complete and utter bag of dicks. They look terrible. They look like they have no idea what they're doing. But at the end of the day, Taylor Heineke's still going to be heaving that thing. He's going to be letting that fucker fly. So I believe Ricky Seals-Jones does have some solid upside this week. Final tight end here, CJ Uzomah, tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals, going up against the Jumbo Jets, which is just a wet dream matchup. CJ Uzomah probably creamed his pants realizing that he gets to go up against the Jets this week. Uzomah has had 2 multiple touchdown games this season. He's had 2 games with 2 total touchdowns in them. He has scored 3 touchdowns. That is definitely not how you do a 3. Do a 3 like this. Not like this. That's fucking weird, like a T-Rex or something. So maybe that's not how their hands look. I have no idea. I've only seen Jurassic Park. Haven't studied those things in a while. So he has scored 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. Week 6 up against the Lions. Week number 6, he had 3 receptions on 3 targets, 3 for 3 like a free throw for 15 yards and a tug. Last week up against the Baltimore Ravens, he went balls deep in there. 3 for 3 again, like a free throw for 91 yards and not 1, but 2 touchdowns. So it's very evident that the touchdown equity there in Cincinnati typically goes the way of CJ Uzomah. So go ahead and pick up Uzomah. He's very risky because, hey, he's probably going to only see 3-4 targets a game. And if he doesn't mosey his way on into the end zone, you're going to be disappointed. But that's how it works for basically every tight end you are streaming off the waiver wire. So thank you guys all so much for watching. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. While you're down there, make sure to leave a like on today's video as well. I love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, goodbye.